This is a recording for Mining Memories on Sunday the 3rd of November. My name's Robert Portman, and we're going to start off by asking you your name and where and when you were born.
My name is Enid Hibbert. I was Enid Cottrell. That was my maiden name. I was born in Cresswell in 1933.
Okay. Which friends or family were involved in the mining industry?
Well, actually, my mother's side of the family goes back to about 1840 in Sheffield in the mining industry. And they lived in Charles Street, which is in the centre of Sheffield near the Lyceum. And they were down as coal miners. And they moved from there to various places, moving out of Sheffield to Manor, and then to Mosborough, and then to Cresswell, and that took place over perhaps 70 years. When they first came to Cresswell, 75 years. And throughout all that time, people in the family worked in the coal mines. And
the family members that you remember and grow up with, which ones of those worked in mining?
Both grandparents, grandfathers, and my father worked at the mine. They weren't actually miners. My maternal grandfather worked in the underground, but my father worked on the pit top, and my grandfather worked as a bricklayer at the pit. But along with the close family there, various other members of the family came. My grandmother's brothers and her mother and her second husband came to live in Cresswell, as did my maternal grandfather's father and various relations. So they seemed to come en masse to the village. As one came, they all followed.
So we've talked a bit about the different jobs and roles that they did. Did any of them talk about the work? Did they appear to enjoy it? Had any good or bad experiences working in the mining industry?
I wouldn't say that they enjoyed it. It was jolly hard work. My father worked on the day shift all the time that I remember.
And which role did your father do again?
He worked on the screens, separating coal. And he always took apricot jam sandwiches and tea, always apricot jam. And I hate it now because that seemed to be all that we had. My grandfather, who had been in the First World War, was profoundly deaf because of his experiences in the First World War. So I suppose he was lucky to get a job back in the pit. And both grandfathers, especially my mother's father, he was determined that none of his sons would work in the pit, because had they all had different backgrounds, I think they could all have done something quite different, but because their fathers did these things, that was what they had to do. And it was very hard work, but I could also say that my mother was connected with the pit, because she was she went to work in the canteen, and eventually became the manageress. And she worked shifts, days, afternoons and nights, and that was particularly hard, because when she was on nights, then we had to be very quiet so that she could have her sleep. And it was jolly hard work there, to scrub the floors, because everywhere was covered with coal dust.
So she worked in catering.
Sorry?
You say she worked in catering in the canteen?
Well, she worked serving the men. As the men came out, she didn't actually cook meals. They served sandwiches and Cornish pasties and drinks and cakes, and they sold towels for the men for the baths and soap. And, that was the sort of job that she had there. And she... of course, she came to know all the men as they came through, and I think she enjoyed it because this was the time when women were beginning to go out to work, and of course she was meeting lots of people, and I'm sure she did enjoy it, and I always knew when she was coming home because we lived in the model village. And her footsteps going through the Gennell, it's very strange. I could pick her footsteps out coming through the Gennell when she was coming home. And living in the model village, and we lived near a Gennell, the men came, lots of men from the top of the village, came through the Gennell on the way to work. So at 6:30 in the morning, something like that, you could hear the footsteps coming, going to work and coming back, and the same at about 2:30 time, and the same at 10, 2:30 at night. And of course, living in the model village, where I did, at number 21, we looked out onto the pit. Not a very nice view. And we looked out onto York House, where the manager lived, onto allotments, onto the tennis courts, the cricket field, and then the pit. And the pit dominated the village with the sounds that it made that came from the pit, which in later years my daughter called the pit breathing, which I thought was quite good because it was that kind of a sound. And also with seeing the buckets go round with all the waste in, and the chimney and the soot that came down on your washing and all that. So we were dominated really by the pit.
Do you think your life in the model village was different at all to maybe some other mining communities, possibly?
I don't think it was different to other mining communities, but it gave me a great sense of wanting to move away from it. And
why was it? Because you were so close to...
It was so close to the pit. And looking back, now the model village has been renovated. I can see for its time, what a good design it was, and we had plenty of places to play as children in the park. But as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, I just wanted to be away from there. We wanted a garden that you could go into. All we'd got is a yard.
So going back to family members that worked in the mining industry, and we've talked about what the normal working days were like. Can you remember whether any members of your family were members of a union at all, and what these organisations might have offered their members?
I suppose they were in a union, but nobody ever said a great deal about it. To me, it wasn't a topic of conversation. To me, there were various clubs that they paid into in case hard times came, but as to the unions, not for me, perhaps to my husband, but not to me.
And other groups in Cresswell, and think social clubs or anything like that, have you any memory of family members being members of those at all?
No, my father, he didn't go to clubs or pubs. He didn't drink, and he didn't smoke. It sounded very, very good. But he was a very keen ballroom dancer, so of course we did other things rather than go to clubs. And he was in the Boys Brigade, which I suppose you can call a club. I was a very keen member. He played the drums in the Boys Brigade band, and that was the kind of life he had, and he had an allotment along with his father, and that was his life, gardening, going to ballroom dances. My mum and dad were very good ballroom dancers, and that was the sort of thing that they did. But my grandfather, both grandfathers, went to the Miners' Institute, and they did like the drink. But so I think my father had seen his father like the drink, and he decided that no, it wasn't for him. So I wasn't brought up in a home where that was the norm, to go to pubs and clubs.
And when they were going dancing, was it in Cresswell, or did they go further afield if they were keen on it?
No, in Cresswell. And of course I went with them, and we had an evacuee who also came and danced, and my mother's brothers went dancing until they were in the war. And on Boxing Day and New Year's Eve, there were always dancers in the drill hall, as I still call it in Cresswell, that they went to. Also, I remember going to Welbeck, to the underground ballroom. And my dad used to be the MC at some of the dances, and I've still got a notebook of his where he's sorted out what dances that they were going to have during the evening, and he mixed it up. And he also played drums in a dance band, so that sometimes he was on the stage playing drums, and my mum had a brother or somebody else to dance with, and sometimes he took 5 or 10 minutes off and came down and danced.
Do you think he enjoyed being an MC and organising and being a part of these?
I think he did, yes. He was a very sociable man. Mm. Well, both my mother and father were very sociable people and liked to mix with people and talk.
Okay, we'll move on to your personal memories as a community member growing up in a mining area. What did a normal day look like to you?
For myself?
Yeah.
Well, I can remember going to school, at the infant school. I can remember my first day there. And it was just, I suppose, a normal child's day. We walked to school, and we did all the normal things at school that that children normally do. During the war, it was particularly difficult because we'd got the evacuees and we were having to share premises. And I was just thinking about, during the war, we went out and we picked rose hips for rose hip syrup. And then I always say that the 1944 Education Act was a godsend for people in our situation, because it enabled us to go to grammar school.
And the 1944 Education Act enabled that?
That enabled it. Before, if you weren't of a certain calibre, you were paid for. And some of the girls that were at school, slightly older than me, possibly just the year above me, were paid for. Their parents might have been a deputy or whatever, but it gave a chance for as I say, ordinary people that passed the scholarship to go to a grammar school. And I was very lucky because my parents wanted me to do that. A lot of parents at that time thought, what's the point?
And which grammar school did you go to?
I went to Shirebrook Grammar School for Girls. And it must have been a good school, but that gave children a chance in Cresswell, and of course some went to Staveley Netherthorpe School, but the year I passed, everybody went to Shirebrook. So we were given that chance to do more than our parents could have done.
And how did you find going to Shirebrook Grammar?
We went on the train. I enjoyed it. Some of my friends went. Others I left behind. They didn't go there. Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Did you do any extracurricular activities or anything like that?
Oh yes. I had music lessons with Mrs. Ball, who was the music teacher in Cresswell. She taught me to play the piano, and between the ages of about 5 and 10, I went for dancing lessons to Worksop, where Miss Sinclair gave ballet and tap lessons at the Palais de Danse, and then I went to Roscoe School of Dance at Mansfield, and I used to go on the train every Saturday morning and come back after having lessons all day and come back at night, and then go to the youth club in Cresswell, which was quite a flourishing club.
And what sort of activities did you do at the youth club?
Well, it was to do with the chapel. It was a chapel run. I went to the Primitive Methodists, but it was started, I think, by the Wesleyan Chapel, and we played table tennis, and we did drama. We put shows on. We talked. There was a little cafe. You could buy coffee and a biscuit, and it was just a nice meeting place for people of our age in the village.
And when your family had time off, so we know we were talking about earlier how we were really into the dancing.
Yeah.
But when you had blocks of time off, did you go on holiday anywhere?
Well, it wasn't lots of time off. It was 1 week in the summer, and we didn't go during the war years. And after the war, we went to Blackpool twice, which I thought was the bee's knees. And then we went to Llandudno. And of course we visited my mother's sister who lived away, but nowhere else. There weren't day trips. I mean, a trip, when I went for the piano exams to Sheffield, that was a day out. It was a whole day. It was a big thing.
Can you remember the sort of things you used to do when you were on holiday?
Well, we went with friends of my mum and dad's, and actually their daughter I've met quite recently, and we used to go on the sands and play cricket and rounders. And in Blackpool, one of my friends went with me one year, and we went on the amusement arcade, and we went to the theatre and just things like that. Okay,
and how you said you moved away from a mining community before we started. How do you think living in a mining community affected your day-to-day life?
people were very, very close. It was a very close community, and you knew everyone who lived around you. And in matter of fact, I've met people older than me. I'm thinking of two in particular, two men, who could tell me who lived in all the houses around. You knew them. It's quite a strange way. You didn't only know your own family, you knew everyone around you, and if anybody wanted help, it was given. We had somebody who lived near us, and she used to send for, had we got any ink, had we got a sheet of writing paper, had we got an egg, that sort of thing. I can't think that my mother ever did that, but this was the sort of thing that people felt able to do. And there were also a lot of Welsh people that had come after the 1926 strike, and we were surrounded by the Welsh accent, which was rather strange to think of it now.
And can you remember the Cresswell Pit disaster at all?
Yes. It happened in the night. My mother was on nights, and I think my father came, and because I was in bed, it happened in the middle of the night, and came and told me. And I went to school. My mother was working. I don't know. I don't think she came home for, only a short time for the next few days, because she was so busy serving all these people. And I went to school, and there were girls in my class whose fathers were in the mining disaster. And I remember the day of the funerals, which was dark and rainy and very sombre. And that had a big effect on the village, terrific effect on the village, because there were people all around living in the model village, where they were all miners. And of course, there was somebody here, somebody there, and that's how it went.
Okay, so you moved away from Cresswell when you were how old again?
18.
18. And moved away. So though you weren't living in a mining community in the years after that,
No.
how did you feel when the mining industry effectively ended?
I felt sad, but in a way, it was very sad for the miners, because it knocked the stuffing out of Cresswell, I think anyway, and I felt very sad that they'd got no jobs, but on the other hand, not having to go down into the bowels of the earth, as it were. And I'd actually been down Cresswell Pit a couple of times, so although I didn't know what it was like working, I knew what it was like down there. And really, should men be working in those conditions? They were it was very, very hard work.
When did you go down Cresswell Pit?
We went, I think when we went I was in the youth club, we went once. And I know from reading the school records of the senior school in Cresswell, that the boys were taken when they were 14, all went to the pit were taken for jobs there. But I went with the youth club, that was the first time. And then they had an open day. I don't know whether it would be in the 60s, 70s, I can't quite remember, but they had 2 open days, and one each time I went down the pit to have a look again, see what it was like.
All right, well, that's fine, Enid. Thank you
Right,
very
thank
much.
you.
So I'll stop recording here.